Okay, it's nearing Halloween again, and I like to do some things out of folklore around then. It's always been one of my favorite times of year. It seems to lead into the holidays quite well. My sister was born around then, and we seem to always have some type of party or something around then. When we got a little older, we started making haunted houses, and it went from there. Here locally, as my daughters grew up and stuff, I made some incredible haunted graveyard houses with uh, ground clinging fog that you run through a chilling system and stuff into it. We still run a bunch of it. Hopefully, we'll do some of it this year. I even have an old coach that's drawn by nightmares and a skeleton, and inside the coach is Dracula that rises up and screams and goes back down and stuff. I've got a few other animated talking ones and things like that, but most people know about this story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's a story of the Headless Horseman, which actually goes back much further, and we'll talk about that. But this depiction is something I grew up with. It's a postage stamp from 1974, and you can tell by 10 cents how things have changed a lot, but it always has to do with this forest, this Sleepy Hollow, and Ichabod Crane. And it's kind of an American folklore tale, and they found that it actually has some legitimacy to truth, and we'll look into that. But did you also know that there are other stories that mimic and echo this down through time? That this wasn't anything exclusive, actually. Well, the exact tale of Ichabod Crane was, of course, but the other tales not so much, and it's kind of a blending in something that had happened quite a few times. If you notice, Ichabod Crane's body is kind of lanky, and he seems to be almost holding a cross in his mouth. And there's um, his horse is all emaciated looking, much smaller than the horse that's behind him, which looks like a nightmare guy in robes situation like that, right? And this horseman thing is reminiscent of like the wraith men or the spirit horsemen that were in Lord of the Rings, and a concept like that. And you'll see that as we talk about it more. But did you know that there was also stories of a headless horseman in the strange tales of Texas, and on about or before around the time of the Alamo, about there being a strange horseman that was on a horse, headless, and wandering the countryside. A lot of people have seen this famous painting by John Quidor where he's throwing the pumpkin at him, and that's Ichabod Crane running for his life through these hills. A lot of people get the idea that this must be in Virginia someplace or the Appalachians or everything, but believe it or not, the original story comes out of upper New York, upper state, like White Plains area and things like that. So let's just get into this here a little bit and discuss it. The Headless Horseman is a mythical figure who has appeared in folklore around the world since the Middle Ages, and I'm going to show you how it goes back farther. The Headless Horseman is a traditional depiction of a man on horseback who is missing his head. Depending on the legend, the horseman is either carrying his head or missing his head altogether and is seen searching for it. Another example is that he's got a pumpkin for a head, but that's in a modern Halloween rendition. Examples include the Dullahan from Ireland, who is a demonic fairy creature usually depicted riding a horse and carrying his head under his arm. The titular knight of the English tale of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and the legend of Sleepy Hollow are short stories written in 1820 by American Washington Irving, which has been adapted into several other works of literature and film, including a 1904 Disney cartoon, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, and the 1999 remake Tim Burton film Sleepy Hollow. It's just based on it, and they, of course, elaborate on it a whole lot whenever they did the new one. Some people agreed, but some people didn't. What's weird is that in that they put in this sacred willow that was there in a hollow on a hill, And there's an old folklore that tells about this tale, but it doesn't even come from there. It comes from England in an older time, back in the Middle Ages. But it does go definitely back before then. In American folklore, the Headless Horseman is a fictional character from 1820 story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. He also wrote, what is it? The guy that fell asleep forever, and oh man, I can't. He's the guy that fell asleep for so many years. It's maybe it'll say it. Or where's his writing? Washington Irving. Here we go. It's from Rip Van Winkle. Rip Van Winkle. Sorry. The legend of the Headless Horseman, also known as the Headless Hessian of the Hollow, for a reason, begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York. During the American Revolutionary War, traditional folklore holds that the horseman was a Hessian trooper who was killed during the Battle of White Plains. He was decapitated by an American cannonball, and the shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield while his comrades hastily carried away the body. Eventually, they buried him in the cemetery of an old Dutch church of Sleepy Hollow, from which he rises as a malevolent ghost, furiously seeking his lost head and wielding a jack-o'-lantern of the time as a temporary replacement and or weapon. Modern versions of the story refer to as rides to Halloween, around which time the battle seemingly took place. And Headless Horseman is also a novel by Mayne Reid, first published in a monthly serialized form during 1865 and 1866, and subsequently was published in a book in 1866 based on the author's adventures in the United States. She spoke about the Headless Horseman, or A Strange Tale of Texas, and it was set in Texas and based on a South Texas folk tale. There's, sadly, to tell you the reality of this happened more than once, and there was a story about a headless man who apparently got his head taken off by a cannonball on a horse, and they didn't grab him instantly like what was told right there in the tale. And so in his rotting corpse on the horse, and the horse went around to farmstead trying to get help and assistance. And you could tell the horse was freaking out. Totally. You can imagine over time. And whenever the people would see him, they would shock and horror and run from him. And the horse was like, what the hell? Can you help me? You can imagine flies starting to get on and just go bad, right? And you can imagine him gumming up to farmhouses and having this dead body on the back of it. And what the horse goes through. I'm very, very much a horse maven, and I've been enamored with him since I was a kid. Here's one that kind of leads towards the Lord of the Rings. The Dullahan, or Dullahan, Darkman, is a headless demonic fairy, usually riding a horse, carrying his head under his arm. He wields a whip made from a human corpse's spine. When a Dullahan stops riding, a death occurs. The Dullahan calls out a name like Baggins, at which point the name person immediately dies. In other versions, he's a headless driver of a black carriage, the Coisty Bodhar, a similar figure in Gan Ossian, or without a head, can be frightened away by wearing a gold object or putting one in its path, like throwing down a gold coin when he's chasing you, things like that. The most preeminent Scots tale of the Headless Horseman concerns a man named Ewan, decapitated in a clan battle at Glen Cananeer, much like Canaanites, on the Isle of Mull. The battle denied him any chance to be a chieftain, and both he and his horse are headless in accounts of his haunting of the area. Probably a good time to interject this here. We found a Aryan burial, which they're buried along with the horses. And the horse had a head, so it's not this one exactly, of course, but it seemed to be a prepared Aryan burial, and it's missing a head. This was, of course, found way over to the east of this, and near the Ural Mountains. but it's been found to have that same effect. In fact, I remember reading about it, and this was 40 years ago now, about this headless horseman that they had found there because he had the horse thing, and it wasn't so commonly known as horse burials yet, but it got to be known. And of course, anytime you see that, it like bring lets you know. But there are horse burials going all the way into India and somewhere else, and we found quite a few of them in the ancient UK area and all the way through Europe. The 14th century poem Gawain and the Green Knight features a headless horseman. The titular knight, after he is beheaded by Gawain, the Green Knight lifts up his head with one hand and rides off from the hall, challenging Gawain to meet him again 1 year later, conspicuously around Halloween too, which is the Day of the Dead. I did a video last year on this, on the Day of the Dead, not Sleepy Hollow, and its connections and where it goes back to and how far it goes back. For people in the New World also had this same timing, and it seems to key around the meteor shower, which a lot of people, including myself, believes goes along with this idea of perhaps even this was a symbol that gets shown every year of the Younger Dryas event that happened, and a memory of it, or a fear that it would happen again. There's a lot of stuff around that. The comic book series Chopper, written by Martin Shapiro, is a modern-day reimagining of the Headless Horseman. It features a headless outlaw biker on a motorcycle who collects the souls of sinners. So it's kind of like that one that Cage did just recently, that biker there that does the same type of thing, right? The only people who can see him are those who have consumed a strange new ecstasy-like drug that triggers their sixth sense and opens a gateway to the afterlife. So their pineal gland gets going and everything else. Wow. So then all of a sudden they can see this guy, but he's after him. During the hallucinogenic high, any characters who have committed significant sins are haunted by the headless ghost. Once the drug wears off, the victim is safe and beyond the headless horseman's ghostly reach. Television. Back in old television, remember Kolchak, the Night Stalker? Anybody remember those? Night Stalker, and it was always something scary and stuff. Yeah. So they had an episode called Chopper, which was broadcast in January 31st of 1975, and I remember seeing this, and it was a headless motorcycle guy who enacts the revenge of a loss of his head to a rival biker gang. In Midsummer's Murder, the Dark Rider, a killer lures several victims to their death by masquerading as a headless horseman from local legends. So there's little stuff like that. Washington Irving's Gothic story, A Legend of Sleepy Hollow, features a character known as that headless horseman, or the Hessian soldier, who was decapitated by a cannonball in battle. It's even been shown in video games and World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls and stuff, and I tell you that goes off of a lot of things. Right now we're fighting in that area that we're in that's supposed to be Avernus, or like hell, and there are horsemen there that are not headless, but they are on fire. Now there's a few stories I could go over here that are much more, are not really mentioned in any of this, but a writer that had done the same thing in America, and during this time people weren't using pumpkins yet apparently, because the idea was a turnip, and that this horse was running around scaring the hell out of everybody, and it ended up knocking it over and setting a farmstead on fire. I don't know if it set the ground on fire and then it set the fence and that got to the house, or how that went down, but it's almost like the old cow that kicks the lantern situation, but it's a jack-o'-lantern and it kicks it down, but this is in its fury to try to get somebody's attention. So imagine this from the horse's point of view once this happens to him, and then for months and months it's going on. For there's old tales that must go back as far as maybe men even had horses. Have you ever heard of the concept of gulag? Gulag's where they tie up a man. Sometimes they would give him narcotics like they talked about before that's going to end up poisoning him and stuff or whatever, but a lot of times they wouldn't. They would just tie this man up to a horse and send it off. sometimes lighting a fire under the horse's ass or shooting arrows at him and things like that, so the horse may not last long after. But there are ancient tales of gulag where it went on, and then that horse keeps showing up for years and years after with this decaying body on it. And the horse is really coming up where it needs help. But it's, of course, a wild horse now. It's all gone crazy. It's, well, couldn't you imagine? And he's coming up and needing assistance. There's a couple other little stories I could probably tell during this, but the idea really comes across is that someone ended up losing their head. Well, did they cut off the head of that guy? No, but it's one of the first things that would rot, wobble, and fall off. You imagine birds trying to come down and attack this horse and stuff, and buzzards following him around. And every place he goes to a farmstead and he goes, oh, thank God, help me. And everybody freaks out on him and chases him off. And he goes to farmstead to farmstead. Pretty much he's a nightmare then after that. For the name nightmare comes from ideas like that, where a mare, a horse, has gone crazy in the night. Well, to people that were all horsemen and everything, that was a nightmare. That your horse had gone wrong, or that things had happened, or something like this went on. Doesn't really happen anymore, but it's lost in folklore and mythology. Just thought I'd share all of that with you. It's kind of a saddening viewpoint, especially with my love of horses, and I hope you have that too. And you can imagine the horror of that horse when he knows everything was cool till this. What happened? Well, can you get him off my back? There's a story of one that they found where the horse was emaciated, dying off. There was only pieces of this guy left on him. The saddle had rotted away, and where it binds around his body had become embedded into his skin and so on. They found once, but that was a gulag event. Well, there's some of the horror for Halloween for you, if you will. Ooh, welcome to Halloween time. I've got a few more I'll probably put out during Halloween about mythology and tales and things and go along with it. Y'all enjoy. Peace.